Okay, so let's say that.
Okay, I'm recording it on my cell now. Okay, so I think it's a crude way, but I think at least we'll have some recording. Okay, hope you're okay with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's imagine this HTML report. Okay, it's called Survey Expos, and it's querying some questions, some responses, so some scoring, and then doing some totaling of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do we see this information when we are in a customer Javier Gonzalez, where we are in the application? We are basically going from the account ID of Javier Gonzalez, and we're going to check, can you please give me all the survey targets of Javier Gonzalez? And then, can you give me all the survey questions for this given target? Can you give me all the answers related to these questions? All of these nested queries, we will see how we can do that. So in general, let's go to the zip file that has this report that we just saw. It's an index file and the Viva library. If we go to the index file, okay, the index file starts with a head, where you put the name, where you put the reference to the Viva library. Okay, the Viva library is the one that is going to have the functions embedded to call the MySQL database that we have underlying. So you just need to call a function in this library that we will see. The library will do the rest, the query, and send you back the information. Then we have some styles, and then we have some JavaScript. In the JavaScript, we have a function that's called init to start everything, and that has a first function that it's going to call, and we're going to be calling function by function. And then at the bottom, we have a body that basically says, upon load of the HTML file, let's call the init function and let's start this. Then you have some columns, 4 columns here, question, response, score, and max score, in a table, and some styles. So how do we query? Whenever this init function starts, comes here, and it basically, whatever, this is just to show some errors. Whenever we have some errors, it's calling the first function, init table headers. Init table headers is calling another function called parse init table headers. We could have avoided this function and called directly this other one, which is basically going to be put some tags or some information in these HTML components. That's not important. And then we're calling start queries. This is our first critical function that we could have named however we want. The rest of before was avoidable. This is calling get data from current object function. It's passing an account. It's an object. It's passing a field, and it's sending a callback function to know what is next until this function ends. Okay? So basically, what this is going to do, it's going to call the other file that we have in the zip file, which is the Viva library, that I will open it as well. It's going to call in that Viva library where we have all the different functions that you can use. This one you don't need to edit it. It's just for you to reference and to be able to do the queries. The function get data from object, and by knowing that you are in the context of an account, it will retrieve you the account ID. In the next function, we will go over all the results, which in this case is 1, and we will map that result account ID into a variable that we just created, current account ID. With the current account ID that we retrieve from the first function, that we know that this function exists because it's documented in our libraries, we will call the second function, get last survey target. Last survey target has another function, query record, where we specify an object, some fields, a where clause, a sort clause, a limit clause, and a callback function. For those attributes, I'm defining the values here. I could define them here or somewhere else. The fields that I'm going to query, ID and survey. It's just the text that needs to go into the second attribute, nothing else. Which is my sort clause by last modified date in the descending manner, which is the where clause that the account of that survey target that I'm querying needs to be equal to the account ID that I'm passing from the previous function. So what this is going to retrieve, because I put the limit 1, is a list of one element, okay, with that ID. Then I go to the callback function, which is parse survey target results, and I go to the survey targets. If the results are successful, if there's not an error in this query, that the function query record that we have here in the JavaScript file underlying has not given me an error, control find query record, which is basically this function that is expecting object, fields, where, sort, limit, and callback, and it's doing the call to the local database. We're going to go over the results, and in general, I'm going to put the first record ID into one variable and the survey ID into another variable, and I'm going to create a second query, in this case to the second question. So I have the account, then I have the survey target, which is the last survey that account executed, but now I need the questions for that target. So what I'm doing is setting a where clause, the survey fields that I need, the question, the text of the question, the maximum score available, and I'm going to put a sort clause and this a where clause that the survey is the one that came from that target, from that last target. Calling all the different questions, I have the questions. I iterate over all the questions and I do some mapping, maps, sets, IDs, however I want to process this information. I store it locally with JavaScript techniques of your choice. And then I'm going to query for all those questions the responses. So I'm fetching up the target ID, I'm querying all the responses that I have, and I'm parsing the responses into another map with the response IDs so that I can parse them. And then I'm calling the update table. Update table is the function that is going to map my JavaScript values to the HTML code by doing inner HTMLs, by doing all that functionality. So basically on the update table, I'm basically going to say that my variable table that I'm working in is going to be mapping to the result table document in HTML. I'm going to set some calculation to do average, minimums, maximums variables, and I'm going to start iterating. At the end of the day, a couple of nested fors for all the questions, for all the response. Whenever the question ID is equal to the response.question ID, then that means that the question and the response are exactly the same, and then I enter into that same row the question and the response. Could you do this better? Probably. This is just a dummy example that I did myself the other day. But it can be done better, it can be queried better so that you don't need to iterate. You can break the context whenever you find. You can do some instead of sequential processing, some direct processing of it, up to you. But at some point you need to paint it in the table. You paint it in the table, you do some calculations for the summaries. All those calculations, you put them in the different cells of the table, and then that basically goes back to your table and exposes it. So that's, for instance, this report, which is basically a table with a couple of styles for the total, for the header, for the questions, and that is crossing questions and responses whenever they have the same ID for the question, and is doing some calculation on the scoring of all the questions. This 22 is calculated, this 100 is calculated, this 4 out of 10 is calculated, and this 22% is calculated. The rest are being retrieved by the fields. So is that more or less clear on how we...
So basically, in terms of the library, right? Yeah.
This library.
The library, right? So you're saying all the functions which are there as part of the library, they are part of your API documentation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we explain what are the expected input attributes and the expected output attributes.
Okay. And then in terms of the testing part of this, right? I mean, initially you said you'll not have a simulator, right? I mean, I'm just wondering, and I'm being naive, right? I mean, do you have any best practices or ease of around how you could easily test this, basically? Because so when you say, where do you deploy this, basically? You say I'm assuming you're going to deploy this on an iPad, right? And then test it, right?
So basically, it's a little bit complex how you do it today. Obviously, the UI component of it, just need to click on the index. You will see it. The databases, the results that you're returning, In your case, you can only check them whenever you have deployed it to an iPad and open it on an iPad. Yeah.
Right. So you're saying you'd write the code, put it into the zip folder,
You just need
upload it, download it onto your iPad, and then see how it kind of.
In general,
works.
you write just a small set of code, maybe the first query. I mean, you can check the queries. You can check if the queries, you log into Workbench, you check the queries and you see if or to any other tool. But in general, yeah, it is tricky. You need to trial error. So my recommendation is that you start small, that you do the first query, you see how it looks like, and that you put some alerts, some checkpoints in the application, like the one that we had here. So this hey is basically some alert that should be here, passing some parameter. You can do that. You can retrieve IDs here to see where you are. If you don't get into the next hey, you know that the code didn't get there. It's a little bit painful, but JavaScript has some good things, some bad things. It will not tell you what you're doing right or what you are doing wrong until you go runtime and you check it.
So the simulators that you have, is it something which you can share?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think so. We can check. We can check with Nathan, but I don't think we can.
Okay.
So it's basically the IPA application itself, so that you can you decompile it, can you check things? So probably not.
Cool. Okay. Any questions from you guys? Q, Ankur on the line.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, nothing. But we need to catch LM once we start development, definitely.
Cool.
So there's people that is using some environments like Elm or some others to define some, or I mean, you can go into Dreamweaver, some other tool, define all your UI components however you please. Then out of the HTML that gets generated, put the JavaScript code out of it. Maybe you don't have to code the whole HTML part, but in terms of the queries, you need to define what your queries are going to be, how you're going to cross the results of the queries, and how you are going to expose it. Yeah.
So what are the objects that we can query? We can query any objects. Custom objects are only calls, medical events, and sales related data.
So you can query any custom object that you find here. Whenever you go to options, database, these objects.
Okay, which are we syncing in the iPads?
Yeah.
Whatever is on the offline, you can query. Yeah.
And there are some functions to translate to different languages, to retrieve record type names instead of IDs.
Mm-hmm.
You can check to be able to do an in function. Whenever you do a query, give me all the results in these sets of IDs, so that you don't have to
Sorry for interrupting between. For changing the languages and for changing the multi-currencies and multi-language, because we have multi-currencies and multi-language implemented in AstraZeneca. So we are using the same functions which are used in Salesforce, or we have something different.
So
in the same way we are creating the labels and we are just trying to fetch them.
So the API, so we need to check exactly if you're using custom labels, custom messages, all of it. The API has some of that queried for you. So based on your language, or based on the query of one of these libraries, it goes to the message object, or it goes to the where you have your custom messages for your language, and it shows you which one is yours. So you need to call these functions.
Okay, apart from this PPT that you are sharing with us, is there any online documentation, or there is any detailed document which we can refer, so that it will be helpful for us to navigate and to.
So basically, the in developer.vivacrm.com insights library that can be accessed. This is going to be made generally available in 17 release 1, whenever that goes to prod in some days from now. But in general, we have already an old library in our help. So if you type here my insights, you can download 4 or 5 reports that are examples, and you can start from there. So you see the JavaScript library here. You can download it as well with some of the functions: query record, get